So I'm Tristan. I own Lion's Den here at our gym. So thank you guys for joining. A little background about me: I do a lot of running. I've run 23 marathons now, and I've got a PR of 2:36. So I've done. I dig this stuff. I very much enjoy running. I'm 30, almost 35 now, and after 15 years of marathoning, I've spent the kind of second half of that trying to figure out how to best make sure that I can do this for the rest of my life. So these kind of workshops are things that I think between Andrew and myself, we're hoping to kind of disseminate some things that we've learned and hopefully can help some people with it. So
yeah. Thanks, Tristan. And my name is Andrew Fix. I'm a doctor of physical therapy, originally from Wisconsin, went to school there, and have not lived there for 5 years. I've been sort of traveling the country. This is the fourth state I've lived in the last 5 years. Spent those 5 years after an orthopedic residency program working with one of the larger practices in physical therapy outpatient world, and just recently decided to leave there and come here to join Physio Room. Our owner Chris is actually in this office right now, but we're fortunate enough to be able to share this space with Lion's Den, with Tristan and the gang here. I do not have quite the volume of marathon running experience as Tristan does. I was a collegiate football and track and field athlete, and then have continued to run, just not quite marathons.
He can run. Don't let that fool you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But I have had the pleasure and the challenge of working with a lot of running athletes over my career, and that's one of the primary groups of people that I treat here, considering our ties to the running community in town. So, I really appreciate you guys coming, and hopefully our goal is that you leave here with feeling like you got a lot of your questions answered. So if you have them, please don't hold them in, ask them. There's not like a book's worth of information on these slides. We really want this to be steered toward what you guys want to learn tonight, okay?
Why don't we do real quick as we get started? Why don't we have everybody kick off their shoes? Because this will be interactive. And we're going to try to kind of front load. We will try to be efficient here. We'll try to front load this as far as us talking, so and then get you guys involved as much as possible here.
So, I mean, just like you maybe heard if you saw the registration page, Tristan and I did a quick video of what you can expect being here. What we're going to talk about is, the foot, the ankle, the structure, and what that looks like, common injuries that tend to happen to runners especially, and like how those things typically get treated, and what really are the root causes to why these things happen in the first place, and maybe how you should treat them could be a little different than what normally happens. And then, like I said, answer questions that you guys have. Okay. Cool. Kicks off, Chris.
Yeah. So one thing, just real quick, just foot and ankle here. This is obviously what we're going to be discussing. One thing that I always think is interesting for people to know is that the foot is made up of 26 bones, 30 joints, and over 100 muscles and tendons and connective tissue. So the foot is, the point of telling you that is that the foot and ankle, it is a very complex system that operates within the system that is, us, our body, right? So one of my favorite sayings is we are a system of systems, and the foot is truly one of the most complex systems within us. And I think, in a lot of ways, we don't give it the kind of merit that, we don't think about it the way that we should. A lot of the times our shoe decisions are made around what looks the best, and the system that is the foot should be treated better than
Who's been guilty of that? Buying shoes just strictly based on what they look like? I used to do that all the time.
Oh, for sure.
I still kind of do, right? I find the one that I want from a coaching standpoint, and then still try to pick the best color.
But anyway, yeah. So the foot is complex, and that's and I think like I said, it deserves to be thought about. So hopefully we'll give you guys some things to think about here.
Yeah. I'm just kind of curious. I imagine some of you have either had or have foot or ankle or lower leg things bothering you, or maybe you're a runner. What are some of common brands of shoes that you guys wear right now? Just throw out some names. So what do you normally wear? Asics. Ultras. Brooks. Anything else?
Vivo Bears.
What's that?
Innovates, Vivo Bears. I got some arrows here.
Joel, you don't count.
So a variety, right? Sort of the reason I say that is, right, if you walk down the aisle at the grocery store, down the bread aisle, there's like 30 different types of breads to choose from. So how the heck do you know which one is the one you should pick? They're all made out of basically the same thing. Some have ingredient labels that are this long, whatever. It's the same thing when you walk into a shoe store, right? There's 15 different brands on the wall. There are different features and little nuances about each one of them. You look at the price. How do you know what to pick? So hopefully by the time we're done wrapping up here today, you have an idea of what you should be looking for in your footwear and what you should do. So I'm going to ask you again either to raise your hand or just admit common injuries that we tend to see, right, of people that are coming in for foot and ankle or lower leg issues. This is not necessarily in order of what's most common, but plantar fascia, Achilles, shin splints, stress fractures. That has been kind of a, not to use the word pandemic in the wrong light, but that's been something that I've seen people a lot for recently. I've dealt with about 4 runners since I've been here that are dealing with stress fracture. So, and there's different causes for each one of these things. You dealt with any of these?
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, just a quick story. In my early years of running, I had terrible Achilles tendinitis in the first, basically, I don't know, probably 12 to 18 months. And I figured out a way to alleviate symptoms, and that was to put a heel wedge in my shoe. And not only did I put 1 in, but I put 2 in each shoe, because that alleviated my symptoms. And I ran for 3 years with a double heel wedge in each shoe. I mean, I was running around in freaking high heels practically and didn't know, but I was treating symptom and not root cause issues. And so ultimately the Band-Aid wore through, and I was dealing with the same issues after a couple of years. So I've definitely had my experience with Achilles tendinitis for sure.
Anybody suffering from any of these things right now? I know. I've got Achilles tendonitis. Who knows the difference between a tendinitis and a tendinopathy? Or have you even heard that word, tendinopathy?
You don't know.
Yeah. Anybody except for Dr. Merritt. Any ideas? Interesting. Is it nerve related? So I'll say yes. Nerves are always related. But any other ideas? Right, so basically a tendinitis is an acute, that little last portion of the word itis, right? Most people know that means inflammation. Tendinitis is more of an acute inflammatory process situation where a tendon, which attaches a muscle to a bone, gets irritated, gets inflamed, usually it gets overstretched, overworked in some capacity, got asked to do something it wasn't ready for. A tendinopathy is less of a inflammatory response. It's more of when that tendinitis becomes a chronic problem, right? Where it's been going on for a long time, months and weeks and years, whatever. Where there's not really like inflammation, you don't see swelling, but the structural organization of that tissue is starting to change and become dysfunctional. So it's no longer able to do its job as well as it's supposed to, or as well as it once was, if that problem continues to progress. Okay. How about bunions? What do you guys think about that? I threw a question mark up after the word genetic, because that's been something I've heard before. My mom has terrible.
I'm not even sure what bunions are, quite frankly.
What's a bunion? On the side of your foot. So what tends to happen, right? You get like a big bump here on the inside of your large toe. That big toe starts to shift and point over, right? We've seen that. Look down at your feet. Is that happening to any of your toes? A little bit. So, just a question. I don't think it's genetic. I think a lot of people do.
It's environmental. There might be some component, but without a doubt, I think you can. We see that there's a lot of commonalities between movement patterns and people with bunions and people without bunions. I can pretty much guarantee you that there is nobody that walks and runs with their feet straight unless they're wearing a pointy-toed shoe that pulls their toes together all the time. If you're walking feet straight and running feet straight and not wearing that shoe, you will not have a bunion. I've never ever seen it. I don't know if you have, but I have.
No. I mean, I've treated plenty of patients that have had. These patients don't always get sent to physical therapy, but after a bunionectomy surgery or trying to put a pin, right, or a wire in there to straighten that out. And what I can tell you is that despite having that surgery to correct that issue, if the cause of why that happened in the first place doesn't get changed, it's going to come back. My mother has had 2 surgeries on the same foot for the same problem. Well, I can tell you, just like Kristen said, she has wide feet and she doesn't wear wide shoes, and her foot gets squished in. So, okay, before we flip to the next slide, some of you guys said that you've suffered or know people that have suffered from these things. What did you do about it? How did you treat that, or what are you doing about it right now, and how's that working out for you? So I'm a physical therapist. Great answer.
Good call.
You get a t-shirt. Rest.
Yep.
Rolling a lacrosse ball under my foot.
Okay, mobilize the bottom of the foot with a lacrosse ball.
That's a good one.
Change your shoes. That's a common one, you guys. Right? I'll tell you what I did in college when I had terrible shin splints. I would get it iced every single day after practice. I changed my shoes. I massaged my leg. I stretched my calves. All the things that I thought I was supposed to do. It took a very long time for my shin splints to go away. And those weren't the things that took it away. So, cool. All right. Well, just like you guys said, this is how we typically hear or see these problems getting treated. Rest, compression, changing of shoes. What you guys didn't say, but I'm guilty of this one too, taking a lot of pain medication. Right? I don't know if I made it through a high school track practice without an ibuprofen. Anything else that is not on that list, Tristan, that you hear people say often that they do?
No, I mean, I think, like you said, I think ibuprofen is definitely, and I think a lot of runners, it's funny you say that, I didn't think about that either, but certainly in my early years of running and when my Achilles were bad, I was very regularly using ibuprofen to manage pain.
Yeah.
It kind of goes with orthotics, but people rely on
Taping, yeah, you can put that.
Yeah, KT.
Absolutely. You can't go to a 5K, 10K marathon without seeing people that have tape all over them, right? Or any sort of athletic event. So my question to you guys is, do these treatments, which are very common, do they resolve the problem? No. Temporarily, right? So what do you mean by that, Joel? They temporarily resolve the problem?
Well, it'll take essentially the pain away, or they just take.
Yeah, so Joel said that it takes the pain away, right? So what I heard Joel say is they resolve the symptoms for a little while.
Yeah, you're treating the symptoms, you're not changing the behavior that caused the symptoms.
Bingo, right? These things treat the symptoms, but they don't treat and resolve the problem that's causing the symptoms to happen. Okay, so now we're going to get into the fun part. We're going to talk about, and I'm going to stop quizzing you guys. We're going to talk about how to treat the problem. Okay, that's probably why you guys all came. So, go for it.
Yeah. So why do these symptoms occur, right? So how do we start kind of connecting some of the dots around why we're dealing with pain in the first place, right? And I think, I told you my little anecdotal story of heel wedges and treating my symptom. But what I needed to understand was that there was a much bigger picture at play here, and part of that has to do with the flexibility, mobility, and the range of motion available to my ankle and to my hips that were playing a huge role in how much pressure was being put on those tissues, right? So when we look at these things, we're going to look at foot and ankle mobility, foot and ankle strength, hip joint mobility, stability, strength. Now, this I think is really important to understand, is that often the foot, ankle, kind of bottom of the chain can be either a victim of poor hip mechanics or strength, or vice versa, and we kind of create this very, kind of cyclical problem, essentially, where they really do kind of undermine each other. So a lot of times, when we see bad foot and ankle mechanics, we almost always need to address the hip. And then obviously you can just run down the list here. Running gait, obviously mechanics can be an issue. A big thing that we find right with runners is that their turnover has a lot to do, and the research would show this, has a lot to do with injury rates, right? People who are, getting up to 180 plus strides per minute tend to deal with a lot fewer injuries than people who are under that number. Now, we can talk about mechanically why that happens.
So, does that make sense, right? People, their turnover, their cadence, Tristan said 180 steps per minute, right? How many steps you take a minute? Why would having more steps per minute potentially correlate with lower rates of injury?
Yeah, one of my favorites, I can't remember whose quote this is, but where your pain is, it ain't. And that is, I think, just so exactly what Andrew's talking about right here. So if you're dealing with Achilles pain, it's going to be something, generally it's going to be upstream. Knee is often going to be up or downstream somewhere. We need to work, if you work right where that pain is, it's going to be a long time till you resolve it.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, let's start getting into some movement, okay? So thank you guys for kicking off your shoes. We're going to start checking some of these things that we just talked about so that you can see how you stack up and how your body stacks up on these little drills or tests that we're going to do. So, Tristan, let's go from the top.
All right, so one of our favorites here, guys, is a squat tells us a lot. So we're going to do a squat, but first we're going to do what we call a fireside squat. This is my favorite test, and I do not pass it. And so I fail at it every time I demo it. But then I hope that Joel or Andrew's here so I can be like, here's how you don't do it, and here's how you do it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go feet and knees together. We're going to keep the heels down to the ground, and we're going to pull without doing that, or pulling the heels up off the ground.
Right.
Andrew can show us a good one here.
So how do we check our hip and especially ankle mobility in a really easy test, like Joel's doing right there. Feet together, knees together, squat all the way down.
So
without falling.
What this displays, guys, is ankle dorsiflexion and hip flexion. Now, if your knees have to splay, then generally that's a sign that we're missing a little bit of hip flexion. If you fall over like I do, or your heels have to come up off the ground, we have lost some ankle dorsiflexion. So
it's hard, right?
it is very hard. Yeah.
It's hard for all of us. It's hard for me too, especially on my right side.
Yeah. So why does ankle dorsiflexion matter, right? Why is this important? Well, it's important because every time we walk or run, your ankle needs to be able to move through some percentage of your full range or end range ankle dorsiflexion. If your end range ankle dorsiflexion is less than what it should be, what we tend to find is that because that joint can't passively move or actively move through full range of motion, those tissues tend to buffer some of that and compensate for that and take on a little more load than is necessary. And when that stacks up day over day, week over week, month over month, without the prerequisite adaptation for strength, we run into calf and Achilles issues. And even if you have the strength, you can still run into calf and Achilles issues. So if we've got full range ankle dorsiflexion, Andrew's the example that this isn't always true. But if you've got end range, it's much more rare in my experience that you end up dealing with Achilles and calf issues. The stiffer the ankles are, the more often you deal with calf and Achilles issues.
Say that one more time again, please.
So the stiffer the ankle is, the more often we see calf and Achilles issues. When the ankle works through full range, and I don't have any science to back this up, I have anecdotal evidence, but in my experience, very rarely do we deal with people who regularly deal, we don't have a lot of people deal with tendinopathy in the Achilles. Andrew's the exception. But most of the time, if they've got full dorsiflexion, They don't deal with a lot of calf and Achilles stuff. It just doesn't happen.
Well, let me paint this picture for you guys. One of the more common sort of patterns that we see, this can go to plantar fasciitis, Achilles issues, shin splints, like really you name it, IT band issues. If we're lacking ankle dorsiflexion, and I've been working on mine a lot on this right side, had surgery on this ankle. If you are lacking motion in dorsiflexion, meaning in a closed chain fashion when your feet are on the ground, that's your shin translating forward over your foot, what's going to happen is, yes, we're not going to have the ability to distribute as much force and dissipate as much force through our ankle, but our body's going to find a way to move regardless of whether you have that motion or not. You're going to compensate. One of the most common compensations for lack of dorsiflexion is a word that we all know and maybe think is scary, is something called pronation. Right? So if you lack ankle dorsiflexion, what's going to happen when your body's weight is over that foot, in order to what we call functionally lengthen your leg, your ankle and your foot are going to pronate inward. Okay, so what tends to happen? So one of these problems, shin splints, right? A common sort of slang term. Most commonly what shin splints are is this muscle that runs up the inside of our lower leg called our posterior tibialis. We talked about tendinitis and tendinopathies before. That tendon gets overworked because each time your foot excessively, and I use the word excessively because pronation is normal to a degree, right? Excessively pronates, it stresses that posterior tibialis tendon, develops shin splints, and then what happens? Your shin hurts, so you put ice on your shin, or you go to the shoe store to get fitted for new shoes. They see that you excessively pronate, so they're going to put you in a stability control shoe or give you an orthotic to support your arch, but none of that stuff fixes the problem that your ankle is too stiff and it doesn't move, right? So this is why when I see people who tell me, I've been to the shoe store, I went 6 months ago and then I got a different pair of shoes and they've tried 4 different pairs of shoes and they're still developing the same problem. It's because the issue never really got treated, right? They're just trying different things to see if it resolves their symptoms, but they didn't address the root cause, which could be a lack of ankle mobility. Okay, so that's just a common thing that we see and something that I went through personally. So it's frustrating when it just happens over and over and over and over.
So let's take that and we're going to kind of dovetail that right into the squat, guys. What we want to see is we're going to have everybody just do a body weight squat. And we'll kind of talk about why a squat tells us a lot about the way we move, A, and B, why this is a drill that we should all, like a good squat, understanding a good squat, why that benefits the foot and ankle itself. Let's go ahead and keep rolling through a couple here, guys, so we can get
Thanks, Jim.
perfect. So, some of what Andrew was talking about kind of carries right over to our squat, right? That lack of ankle dorsiflexion starts to create a lot of inward, or what's called a valgus movement pattern, right? So as that happens, we start to see an erosion in hip stability, and especially as that's repeated time over time, right? So if your natural squat is to kind of come down into this position here, you can see how what I always say is, does this look like a position of athleticism to you? Because it doesn't feel like one to me. If this is your natural squat, we want to work on that, right? If you look at some of the best athletes in the world, one of my favorite athletes of all time, Barry Sanders, in my books, the greatest running back ever. If you look at Barry and the way that Barry ran, Barry had missed 3 games in his entire career. And if you look at the way he ran, he always displayed the ability to generate external rotation through the hip. There's a great video that I saw the other day, and Barry gets slammed into by a defender. I think it was against Minnesota. He gets slammed into. One leg's off the ground, one leg's on the ground, and that knee doesn't go anywhere. I mean, he's got so much external control and stability in that joint, it doesn't move anywhere. So point being is when we're able to display that hip rotation, in turn, we're going to be able to stack the ankles up. We're going to be able to display an arch control here. And this is something that we wanted to make sure that we communicate it effectively. What we don't care if your arch is low or high. What we care about is, can you display arch control? Meaning, if your arch, my arch is really high, right? So I do, like I said, I do a lot of running.
You can probably see it from there.
And I am stiff. So for me, can I display a level of arch control? Can I still flex this foot? Can I create more arch? Can I let it flatten out, which isn't great? But do I have both the stability and the strength to be able to display arch control? So that's one of the things that we want to look at. And a squat is a great way for us to practice that arch control. All right, so when we squat right, i.e. feet straight, generate some external rotation through the hips, and I come down to the squat with my knees out, now I'm in a position that translates to sport, right? This position translates to sport. Now, even if my ankles are stiff, let's say I can only get down to here before my heels want to come up off the ground or before I want to compensate into this position, that's okay. We'll train into this position to start.
Yeah.
Between Andrew and I, we can help you get a lot lower into there with some time.
Yeah, and I would say, from my standpoint, I tend to work with a lot of people who are already dealing with issues, right? With pains, with aches, that are unable to do the activities they want to do. From a squat standpoint, I would rather see somebody squat partially with correct form than compensate and get all the way to the ground, right? Or A to G, like some people like to say.
So display hip stability and display a strong, stable foot position at the bottom, and now we've got a position that translates to sport, and that includes running.
Yeah, we didn't exactly talk about how you can do that. So Tristan mentioned generate some external rotation torque in your squat.
We're going to do that test, though.
There you go.
I got you.
Oh, we're gonna not spoil the surprise.
We're going to do a torque test. I want to do a torque test. Let's hit toe mobility and then I'll finish.
So at least on one foot, preferably on both. Let me have you remove your socks if you still have them on. Okay. So commonly, and this is not bad, commonly in physical therapy, when people come in with foot problems, physical therapists work with their foot, right? With the patient's foot, work with the muscles and joints of the foot. So what I want to see today is what kind of control do each of us have over our toes and how we can move our toes around. So not that you should be able to move them exactly like your fingers. However, you should have some dexterity in your toes to be able to move them at least in a sequence that we like to call toe yoga. So what I want to see, while keeping your 4 smaller toes on each foot on the ground, can you lift your big toe up in the air?
I struggle with this one.
And keep the other ones down. Joel's doing a great job.
Well, I can't get my left one though.
Interesting.
This one is always a problem.
Oh, that's a bad sign.
Joel, I'll give you a card.
That's a bad,
Cut the toe off.
that's a bad sign. That leg might need to be amputated.
So can you lift the big toe, keeping the other ones on the ground, right? And now what I'm seeing some people do in order to do that is I'm seeing some rolling out, like you're rolling onto the outside of your foot. So try to prevent that urge to rock onto the outside of your foot to make that happen. Okay, now go ahead and put your big toe down. Now I want to see if you can do the exact opposite thing. Can you lift your 4 toes and keep your big toe down without rocking onto the inside of your foot?
Got that one.
Right? And I'll tell you, we challenge you with this the harder way. This is a whole lot harder to do standing than it is sitting, right? Because you don't have the weight on your foot, so there's a lot more foot control going on now. But so that's a little exercise we call toe yoga. Trying to learn how to work your toes separately, I should say. Small toes and large toes. Small toes and large toe. Pretty hard to try and move each individual smaller toe by itself.
So real quick, guys, we're just going to do a torque test. So what I mean by that is I want you to kind of think about a couple things around the stable position. So what we want is I want to create kind of a reference position for us when it comes to daily standing, right? So, and then we'll kind of test and explain why that's a strong position. So if we get feet straight here, everybody get feet straight for me. Perfect. Now, if we're rolled in excessively, I want you to create some external rotation and pull your ankle to the middle of your foot. If you're like me and you're more prone to go out, I'm going to, especially my left side, I'm going to try to kind of create almost a little bit of internal and find that middle point, okay? So from here, I'm going to rock back onto my heel and then onto the ball of my feet. I'm going to do a few of these here.
And I'm just basically trying to find that nice midpoint on my foot here, guys. So feet are straight, rock back and forth, and then let's just kind of settle right in the middle, essentially. So I want you just to feel that back forth, feel that weight distribution change. And then our goal here, guys, is that we've got a nice kind of centered foot position here now. Our big toe is in contact with the ground, but it's not necessarily gripping the ground. It's just in contact with the ground here, okay? Majority of our weight's going to be distributed on the outside of the foot, so we're displaying that arch control, and our heel is in firm contact with the ground right now, okay? So that is a good reference point for us here. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to flex that arch like crazy. So here comes that arch control. Flex it, and I want you to externally rotate your hips. So I think you're trying to open your hips as much as you can. So your butt should be squeezed here as we're in this position. And we are going to hold this position as hard as you can go here, guys. So this is torque, okay? This is our ability to display torque through the hip, okay? Now, what I want to show you is a foot straight torqued position. Go ahead and now turn the feet out.
Right, and when he says torque, he's talking about without the foot moving, screwing that foot into the ground, or into the turf here.
Yeah, think you're kind of rooting yourself into the ground, right? Those hips are becoming active. Now, take that, do everything we just did. Kind of find that midfoot again, with your feet turned out. Find that midfoot. Kind of find that good position.
Feels good.
I think what I think you'll find is, unless this is your natural stance, if this is your natural stance, then this won't be strange to you at all. But still, what you'll probably find is that your weight likes to roll inwards here, okay? Now, this is that practiced valgus position, right? Now, try to generate torque and feel the difference. Let's generate as much torque as you can. Again, what position feels stronger here? Feet out or feet straight, right? When feet are straight, and this is like one thing to kind of take away here, guys, is it's easy to kind of find ourselves in these kind of lax positions where we're like trying to turn off as much of the body's musculature as possible but still be standing, you know? It's like, how do I maximize my rest and stay not on the ground? We want to get out of that. We want to get strong in our stance. So when we're standing, and I think this is one great takeaway, is especially a lot of us working from home or kids now doing school from home, is do it barefoot. Do it barefoot, stand as much as you can, and create that feedback loop between the bottom of the foot and your mind, right? And create that strong reference point. Because that reference point in turn starts to give us better hip function, and we already explained why that is beneficial as far as the squat's concerned, right? So anyway, that's the torque test. So I just wanted you guys to see that. We'll jump on the balance beam now, I think, and we'll get this going here a little bit.
So one of the tools that we use here inside the gym is these green balance beams, and we sort of spaced them out so that each of you could try them out to try and see what kind of foot and hip and balance control do the clients that we're working with have. And one thing that we see is in these tests, this torque test and these squat test and things that we've gone through, the people that tend to do better on those also tend to do better on these balance beams. So take turns if you need to. On this larger one, there might be room for each of you on each side. And what I want you to do is just step up onto the balance beam, and without going really fast, right, I want you to try and just walk across the balance beam in a forward direction.
Let's just have holds.
So let's just have them hold. Then we get more room to...
That'd be easier to share, guys. Let's just do a static hold. Yep.
Can you balance on the balance beam? And what does your foot feel like?
And we're going to let the clock run for a few minutes, guys. Everybody spend some time on here. And one thing I want you to think about as you're doing this is, do you feel like the musculature knee down is working the hardest, or is the hip working the hardest? Okay? So what's working more, knee down musculature or the hip?
Now, a couple of people here tonight are not strangers to this, right? Because they come to this gym regularly, so they know all about these balance beams. And I can tell you, I've gotten better at them since I've been here. I've practiced a little bit. Didn't always look too pretty.
I want you to try to spend like 30 seconds to 1 minute maybe on one leg, and tell me, tap the ground where you need to. But like I said, I want to see, is it knee down that's lighten up, or is the hip lighten up? Because that's going to tell us a lot, guys. It's a great diagnostic. It is a great diagnostic tool for us.
So,
you're
one
fine.
thing that
You can go.
I noticed, right,
You can
is
jump on it.
if you're not accustomed to spending a fair amount of time out of your shoes, it might be very uncomfortable to stand on this with your bare feet, right? If your foot is used to having a lot of cushion, well, when it encounters a firm surface, it doesn't always feel the greatest right away, so this pole or bar may feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So, but what some of the pictures here in the slides don't show is just how much of a sensory receptor our foot really is, right? Our foot is literally designed to be the point of our body because we're 2 feet, right? We don't have 4 legs, four feet like a lot of animals do. Our feet are designed to come in contact and sense the ground and interact with our brain constantly, right? Even more so than our hands, because our hands aren't always in contact with something. We can sense a lot with our hands, but our feet are designed literally for that. So what do you think, to answer Tristan's question?
Yeah.
Do you feel like your hip is working harder? Or do you feel like your lower leg is working harder on these balance beams?
Raise your hand if it was lower leg.
Saw a lot of lower leg points.
Okay? Raise your hand if it was hip. Okay. So, the right answer to the test is hip. No, it's we want the hip to work, okay? So, why this is a great diagnostic tool is if you feel knee down, generally that's a good indicator to us around what's going on with that hip and how good of a job it's doing from a stability standpoint. Now, what does that mean? It means that we got to teach you how to squat really well. Because once we squat really well and we get those hips integrated into that squat, then we find that the hips start to turn back on. And there's a lot more to it than just a squat, but a squat is a great kind of anybody can do it way to strengthen that connection and getting those hips turned back on. We'll talk a little bit more about that right at the end here today.
Yeah. Now, you already alluded to it, this last point, right? If tissues are in need of mobility, there are a lot of ways that we can go about accomplishing that, right? Sometimes people stretch, sometimes people use lacrosse balls or other tools to mobilize that tissue. So what I want to do today really quick is just at least talk through and teach you a more effective way to go about mobilizing out a tissue. So it's a good idea, like Tristan said, spend time barefoot. If you're working from a desk, working from home, just get out of your shoes so that your foot can move. But I'm going to use my calf here as an example of ways that you can mobilize a tissue. So I'm going to use the lacrosse ball. Now what a lot of people do, right, on a foam roller or a lacrosse ball, is they just sort of roll around for a few minutes, and then, okay, it's uncomfortable, it hurts, and then they get up and they go on with either their day or their workout or whatever. One of the most effective tools that we have at our disposal to make this more effective is our breath, right? So the control of and how we use our breath while we're mobilizing the tissue. So in order to get the tissue accustomed to the pressure, it's a good idea to roll around a little bit generally. And then when you find a spot, like I just did in my soleus here, in my calf, that is really uncomfortable, those are the spots that you want to apply and sustain pressure to. And while you're doing that, it needs to be an appropriate amount of pressure that allows you to breathe normally. I like to go in through the nose, out through the mouth, but we like to say, breathe in for 4, hold for 4, and out for 4, or even 6 or 8 seconds, right? And go through several breath cycles until your body starts to dissipate that discomfort. Now, then there's other ways that you can mobilize this tissue a little bit more aggressively. We use a term called contract and relax, right? So now that is less uncomfortable as it was before, what I'm going to do is squeeze and contract the muscle that the ball is putting pressure on, hold that for several seconds, and then relax and let the weight of my leg apply more pressure to that ball. Now it can dig in there a little bit further and still continue to maintain your normal breathing, which I'm doing a bad job of because I'm just talking, right? Go through that several times, contract, relax. And then lastly, you can do what we call a tack and floss. So now that this ball is putting putting pressure into my calf, what I can start to do is move the calf muscle, right? So I'm gonna floss or move my ankle back and forth. It's a little harder on a ball than on a roller because it doesn't hold still. And work that tissue underneath the pressure, right? So, doesn't necessarily take more time, but it is a lot more effective than just simply rolling on an area that is uncomfortable. How you can get like maximum benefit in typically about the same time.
I think one thing to add to that, guys, is everything Andrew talked about is about affecting change to the tissue. Often when we see people just kind of mindlessly rolling, there is zero impact on that tissue. Like if you have do a movement, mindlessly roll for a second, do movement again, what we call a test retest, they are like, that feels the exact same. When we integrate the breath work and then some of our kind of nervous system components around contract, relax, and flossing, we see very immediate impact in our test retest. So these things work, they're very effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Any questions on that?
And one other thing I was going to add too is just if tissue, and Andrew kind of talked about this, if tissue is tender, i.e. it hurts to pressure, it means it needs love, okay? That is dysfunctional tissue. Functional tissue does not hurt to compression. I mean, within reason. Yep.
What is that? Muscle and tendon, or is that just talking about muscle?
Good
So-
question. Is that muscle and tendon? Like that you would apply situation to?
Both, yes. Yep. So what we find though, it would be both, but what we find generally with tendon, it's just, you're gonna have like one thing that I try to get people off of is rolling the IT band. There's just no blood flow to the tendon. There's very little blood flow to connective tissue, right? So we don't see the same kind of release mechanisms in there. But I would say that, like, for instance, I think especially contract, relax in particular, I think if you kind of contract tissue upstream, which obviously puts some tension then on that tendon and then relax, I still feel like I get a little bit of a desensitization there, but I don't necessarily think we're getting some of the same kind of release mechanisms and perfusion just because it's a tendon versus a muscle.
Well, and I don't mind, going headfirst into some misconceptions that are out there, and the IT band is a big one. Rolling the IT band as a mechanism to lengthen your IT band has been something that's been around for quite a long time, and something that is, I don't know, almost laughed at as like a badge of honor, like, oh, I roll my IT band all the time, it hurts real bad, or it hurts so good type of thing. I will tell you that there is absolutely zero evidence that rolling your IT band, in fact, makes it longer. And I'll tell you that is impossible because the IT band is not a stretchable tissue,
It's
right?
one of these poles.
Yeah. The IT band is literally too strong of a connective tissue to stretch. It does not matter how much force you apply to it. It's more likely to literally just like rip in half than stretch. It does not get longer. And I'd be happy to have this conversation with anybody about that. But what you can do is where that, like Tristan said, you can work the muscles around that IT band and get some desensitization. You can also work the muscles at the hip where that IT band ultimately originates from. And if you can make a little change up there, it can make a big change in how your IT band feels. And I know we're talking about now a knee issue, but stay on the lookout for some more content because I'm going to be doing a piece on this very topic because it still happens all the time. You walk in any gym and you see people just rolling their IT band and with the assumption that's making it longer.
If you're dealing with some kind of patellofemoral lateral knee issues, seriously, hit here, you do veins, it goes away.
Absolutely.
Attest to that.
I can, we'll go ahead, Sean.
No, I can attest to that. I'm training for marathons and trying to stretch my IT band, like it doesn't work.
Yeah.
I gave up running.
Because,
Well, I found a
hopefully-
PT that said it's your hip.
Yep, and that is.
Because I ran with it in a week.
Good.
Good.
That's
You
awesome.
found a good PT,
That
that's
is
good.
awesome. Cool.
I got one question for you guys.
Yes.
What's your favorite mobilization tool or toy that you guys like working lower leg, foot?
Oh, man.
What's your favorite? Or do you have one?
Good question. Favorite mobilization tool for the lower leg? It depends on what I'm working on, I guess. If I'm working, in the tissue on the inside of my leg or on the shin, I like to take a relatively smooth object, say the backside of a spoon or butter knife or something, or this metal tool we have here, and really work into that tissue.
So yeah, just a gentle scraping tool. Again, another great way to desensitize some tissue. And this can be over applied, and don't be overly aggressive with this. So we're not like, the recommendation here is very light and very little, but it can be really powerful when we hit just some easy scraping up the tissue here. And it looks like I'm doing nothing, but you will get a palpable desensitization of those tissues there.
It doesn't always have to be extremely aggressive to lead to the result that you're looking for, right? And I know you guys, we're getting a little bit close to time, so I appreciate you hanging out with us. We're going to sort of go through some final take-home items and talk about footwear just a little bit without hopefully getting too lengthy. We could talk about footwear probably for hours, but we sort of started with this topic. There's a lot of shoes at the running store, at the shoe store, or wherever. What shoes should you wear? Now, there's a reason we got you out of your shoes in here today, because we feel strongly that the foot should be able to function like a foot. So let's talk about the importance of your running shoes and what you decide versus the shoes that you wear all the other time throughout the day.
Yep. So I think it's really, kind of our basic concepts here, and I'm going to try and make this concise today, is, like Andrew said, when we look at shoes versus barefoot and shoe look versus function, right? If your shoe doesn't look like your foot looks, then it's probably not allowing your foot to function like your foot, right? So if your shoe comes and narrows at the toes, that is not what your foot does, okay? Look at a baby's foot. Their foot does not narrow at the toes. Their toes splay out, right? Adult toes often narrow because of the environment that we've exposed them to, i.e. the modern shoe. And make no mistake, there's zero science behind the modern shoe. Nike, it's a long story that I won't bore you with, but it's pretty interesting actually, but I won't bore you with it. But it is, but like how the trainer came to be what it is just, like literally there's zero science behind it. So it's quite ridiculous considering how much, I would argue often, that a traditional trainer really does more harm in the long run than it does good. And so what we look for out of a functional shoe is flat, flexible, ideally low cushion and wide, okay? That allows your foot, this shoe allows my foot to operate like a foot should operate. We're going to get into performance shoe here in a second and some of the differences. But if you are walking or standing around all day and the tissue demand is relatively low, i.e. you're not sprinting, you're not trying to go run 6 miles, you're not trying to go for some crazy hike up a 14er or something like that, there's no reason to be in a highly cushioned shoe in that environment. You should be in the exact opposite. We want to build that relationship again with the bottom of our foot, and that starts with allowing your foot to actually feel the ground underneath it. Unfortunately, if you're cocooning it in a pillow, it doesn't feel the ground particularly well.
And you guys already know that is true, because I'm sure all of you have felt what it feels like to go from walking on a relatively firm surface where your foot has the ability to sense the ground to then walking on something that's very soft and squishy, like a foam mat, for example, or maybe walking on a trampoline where the ground is moving and your balance does not feel quite as good, right? So the same thing happens in little children right around 1 year old when they start walking around more, and then us as parents, right, we want to buy the cutest little shoes to put on them. I don't know why I said us as parents, I have no children. Parents out there that have kids, we put shoes on them, and what happens is they start falling down all the time when they were walking fine before we put the shoes on their feet. It's because they no longer have the ability to use their foot as that sensory tool that we talked about before, and it takes them a while of developing to be able to walk in their shoes without continually tripping over themselves. So yeah, you basically just took this great device of our foot that we talked about, has so much complexity to it, and then you stop it from being able to do its job. So this top point and this quote here that we want to leave you with is something that I talk to all of our runners about, and I know Tristan does too, is the shoe that you spend the most amount of time in should undoubtedly, like you said, be a shoe that allows the foot to function like a foot. And because of that, when we're working with running athletes, really, we care more about the shoe that you wear all the time than the shoe that you wear while you're running. Because for most people, unless you're an extremely elite athlete that's putting in an insane amount of miles, you're going to spend a lot more time in shoes that are not your running shoes. Okay, and most runners don't even wear their running shoe for anything besides running. Right? You have your running shoe that's all you do, and but that's not where we spend the most of our time. So if we want our foot to really function optimally, think about where can we get the biggest bang for our buck. It's not by just changing your running shoes, it's by changing what you do the rest of the day.
It's low-hanging fruit, guys. It really is. It's the way to strengthen the bottom of the chain by just living. I mean, you're training. You are training the bottom of the chain all day long if you're in a shoe, like Andrew said, that allows your foot to operate like a foot. We'll quickly go to performance versus function.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Recommendation at home, I'm working at home, or barefoot.
Barefoot,
Yeah.
100%. If you're at home, barefoot.
So why do, when doctors a lot of times say, when you have plantar fasciitis,
Yep.
you should wear supportive shoes?
Yep. Because they want to alleviate your symptom as quickly as possible. They're not trained to address your root issue often, not always, sometimes they are. But their goal is going to be to get you out of pain. So you are not going to ultimately address the reason why that plantar fasciitis is there in the first place. You will, though, in turn, take away some of that symptom. So for you, it's a trade-off, right? And our goal would say, tolerate some pain, let's build the strength, and let's address the root cause so you never deal with this again.
Yeah, I agree 100% that, I have and obviously all providers are, some are good, some are bad, just like any profession out there, right? There's better lawyers than others, there's better accountants than others, there's better physical therapists than others. But sometimes when you go into an office, like say for example, someone has plantar fasciitis, maybe they walk into a podiatrist office and they get looked at, like I said, from here down. And maybe what's leading to that plantar fascia symptom is an issue in the hip. Hip mobility, hip stability, strength is lacking. Eventually your foot starts to hurt, but that's not where you go. You don't go see always like someone who's going to look at your hip when your foot hurts. You go to see a foot doctor, right? And if they don't look at the other things that's going on, they're not going to treat the problem in that case. So I would recommend, and what I tell all of our patients, of course I care what your symptoms are, but we don't treat your symptoms. So sometimes people ask me, well, should I come see you, when I'm hurting or when I'm feeling good? And it really doesn't matter that much. I like to see you in both situations, but the impairments that are leading to the problem are probably there regardless of whether you're hurting or not. And that's what we're going to look for, and that's what we're going to treat. And I can bet you that's probably going to relieve your symptoms and the problem so that you're not dealing with it. So we don't treat it, right? We don't treat the symptoms. So plantar fasciitis is not something that you should treat in isolation, and it's not something that you have to keep dealing with for a long, long, long time.
Would you say go barefoot on hardwood and tile?
I would say go barefoot all the time. Now, not in a situation, right, where you're going to be putting your foot at risk. I don't go walking around outside with there's glass around.
Don't shatter glass and then step.
Yeah.
But yes. So the idea would be to absolutely barefoot on tile and hardwood, and the idea would be to build your way into it. So let's say, and this kind of goes back to plantar fasciitis too. Let's say you are dealing with foot ankle pain and or soreness. Our goal would not be to go from 0 to 100, right? Our goal would not to be going from no time barefoot to all time barefoot. Our goal would be to build your way up. And as you build your way up, again, the prerequisite strength required to handle that eventually starts to, you're just trying to incentivize adaptation, right?
Yeah.
And we, Andrew and I, Joel and Chris and Lindsay, all of us walk around here, and these shoes have nothing to them. I'm on my feet all day, every day. My feet are literally never sore. But it took me probably about, I'd say probably 4 months to transition from being in a traditional shoe about 5-6 years ago into a barefoot shoe. So it did take me some time. When I got my first pair of real barefoot shoes, I would take them to work. I'd walk around in my trainers, and I put on my barefoot shoes for the first hour, 2 hours. As soon as my feet started to get really sore, I throw on some shoes. And that's actually what we can finish up with on performance here real quick too. Just talk about how shoes can still buffer certain demands, right? So it's not that you are never in a shoe with cushion or that you don't run in a shoe with cushion. Andrew and I are big fans of excuse me, Ultra here, which is a shoe that we would argue that really allows your foot again to operate like your foot. So it's a wide shoe, it's a zero drop, it's reasonably flexible for a running shoe, and it's a reasonable amount of cushion. So this is not a minimalist shoe by any stretch, but it really checks the boxes for us in a handful of ways. And so it's a shoe that we recommend. Now, Kipchoge,
Ultra
yes,
is here, right?
Yes, they're
Ultra
basically
is
right.
from here.
Yep.
So, I mean, if you want to support a local place, that's
True. Yep. And their headquarters are here. Kipchoge ran, he ran in a newer version of these. Kipchoge just ran the sub 2-hour marathon in a shoe that became super controversial because, essentially you could make an argument that it was a performance enhancer because of the carbon fiber plate in it. And that shoe was quite literally engineered to make the human animal faster. Now that is a performance-oriented shoe, and we are not arguing for never utilizing a performance-oriented shoe. What we're arguing for is if your goal with running is to be healthy for a lifelong, or to be able to run for your entire life, and to be able to again express the foot and ankle the way that we are talking about, working your way into some ultras might be a good idea. But like Andrew said, it may not be either, and really what's important is just putting you into a shoe that you spend the most of your day in, that is barefoot, and allowing that and building the strength up to be able to tolerate and do that.
Right. And I'm a very good example. So like Tristan just said, this Nike shoe has a carbon fiber plate in it. This is one of Hoka's versions of the same thing. I own that shoe. I ran in it yesterday. I'm going to run a half marathon in it next week. But I don't run in that shoe all the time. Right, and I can very much tell you that shoe very much pinches you onto the front of your foot because of where that plate is, and it is not flexible like the ones we just showed you. And but I'm only wearing that for a specific purpose, right? To run fast for this event, and hopefully not sustain an injury in the process. But it's something that like the shoe, like we said, that you spend most of the amount of time in should be what we consider a functional shoe. It's the same reason that we see a lot of, Toyota Camrys and Honda Accords driving around the streets, is because they're a very functional car, and you don't see NASCARs driving down Main Street downtown, right? NASCARs are performance automobiles that are used for a very, very specific purpose to go really fast and not have to turn a whole lot, right? Well, that's not what our feet do, right? Our feet go fast, they go slow, they step up and down on things, and we want a shoe that allows us to do what we're asking the demands of it.
And I want to open this up for questions here if we have any at the end. Really quick, I just want to finish with this picture. A is great, and I think it tells us a lot, right? Traditional trainer, very big heel to toe differential here. So heel is higher than the forefoot. Again, there's a history to that, but it's not because it needs to be. I promise you that. We get a curl up at the end of the toe, and then you're also going to get a narrowing at the foot. This is a flat shoe, i.e. a Vivo Bear right here. Again, the foot is flat, gets to operate as the foot operates. These are things to think about, guys. If you want to transition into a barefoot shoe, but are like, hey, I'm on hardwood floors and tiles all day and my feet get sore, Ultras are a great way to kind of bridge that gap for a walk-around shoe as well, because they'll provide cushion, but they have the width and the differential is 0, so we're going to start to get that Achilles cord lengthened back out, that systematic shortening goes away, and then the foot's able to spread back out. You can start building that strength and working in and out of those ultras. I think that's a great way to start to start the transition into kind of daily, more minimalist footwear, barefoot at home kind of stuff.
Now, we've sort of already talked about these things. The major takeaways, right, is just start to spend some more time, if you don't already, out of your shoes, or at least in a shoe that is what we call functional, that allows your foot to do the things that it needs to do, and just start to see what happens. okay? Just start to see how you accommodate. Tristan and I could both tell you, my feet don't look the same as before I started to wear these types of shoes. I was developing a little bit of one of those bunions, and I thought it was genetic. And then I started wearing shoes that weren't squishing my feet, and it's going away. So find and work on the limitations that you have, whether it's ankle mobility, hip stability. Those are the problems that you need to address to alleviate the injuries or the issues that we talked about before. And be aware of your positioning. So we did this torque drill. That's something that you should do every single day, right? When you go stand in your kitchen or go stand in line at the grocery store and you're just sort of hanging out, just notice that and go, oh man, I can get my feet straight, be active, make sure that arch is in control, get the glute muscle turned on, stand in a ready to move state, and then start a movement practice daily if you don't already have one, right? If you're, I assume just based on watching you guys move, you guys like to exercise, or you probably wouldn't have shown up here. Keep doing that, and seek out some guidance if you need it to address these limitations. If you have any, what questions are sort of out there from the stuff that we just talked about? And I'll stay. I know Tristan will stay. If you guys have like individual, unique questions, I don't mind staying as long as I need to address those. But do you guys have any questions now?
When you're self-treating, that whole pain and breathe thing, like when do you trust the pain versus like, well, that pain is a bad thing?
Yeah. So what I would tell you is you're the only one that's going to know the answer to that. So like when we're teaching people how to mobilize things, whether it's a joint or a tissue, if it feels bad, not just uncomfortable, right? But like if it feels bad, like something bad is happening to you, there's a good chance it is, and we need to back off, right? If it feels sketchy, it is sketchy, because you're the only one that's going to know that. So, as we're working with people, we're asking them regularly, how does that feel? How does that feel? To see if we get a sense of, something is a little too much. But yeah, great question.
And I think some things, if you can't breathe in and out through the nose, then if it's so intense that you're having to clench and hold your breath, it's sketchy at that point. If you're getting any zings, i.e. you're starting to get into some nerve somewhere, it's sketchy, get off of it kind of thing. The idea with the breath work would be, if you can breathe through it, then you're probably fine to be compressing it. Any other questions?
What about sandals, flip-flops?
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. Great question.
That is great.
Burn all your flip-flops. Okay.
It's fun.
Yeah, well, Coop, they're gone now. Time to go. So, the reason why flip-flops suck is that when you walk through, as soon as you toe off, your foot cannot help, your big toe cannot help but create a little bit of flex to grip that little thong that runs through the big toe and second toe, and you are going to, and that's exactly when your big toe should be going into flexion and not be trying to flex in and grip, okay? So what I would recommend is a sandal with a heel strap, Coop. So we could probably forge one out of duct tape. I bet we can. Joel's hand. So
Very.
but get a strap.
And that's one of the things, right? That mechanism that Tristan just alluded to, where the toe is not able to move how it's supposed to because you're gripping your sandal. That's, how common and prevalent plantar fasciitis is in people that spend a lot of time in flip-flop sandals.
And they tend to walk like this. One of my favorite sayings with the Arapaho kids that I'm fortunate enough to work with is, athletes walk with their feet straight, ducks walk with their feet out. You are an athlete, you are not a duck. If you are walking like this, that is not good for your feet. So we want to walk feet straight, and often flip-flops
Yeah.
create an
Thank
environment
you
where we
for
want to
that
crank the toe.
question.